こんにちは。オール AI の、ライスキャピタルの福山太郎と
前田博です。
よろしくお願いします。
はい。
今日はサンフランシスコのハーパーという私がライスキャピタルとして投資している投資先の会社に来ています。ハーパーはですね、Y Combinatorを2025年に卒業して、AI ネイティブな、保険代理店を、アメリカで展開しているサービスで非常に、伸びていて、先日、40ミリオンちょっとのシリーズ A のファイナンスも発表した、会社です。でそこのダコタという創業者兼 CEO に今回私と、前田さんでインタビューしたいと思います。よろしくお願いします。All right, then let's get it started.
Let's do it.
Yep. Maybe if you could start with the introduction of yourself. What do your company do roughly to the audience?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Dakotah. Background on me, I worked mostly in finance before. I was a banker at Goldman. Then I worked in private equity at Carlyle. And then I was at Coach for a while. And I started Harper in August of 2024. Harper is an AI native commercial insurance brokerage. What does that actually mean? There's lots of businesses, 36 million here in America, that need insurance largely for regulatory reasons, or they want to move into a building, or their customers require it. And they have to go through a web that's kind of complicated on the other side with carriers that cover the risk that they need to get insured. And we as a brokerage sit in the middle of that, helping to match and work with our customers directly to figure out, well, what are the risks they need covered, and then broker those in markets across lots of insurance carriers to get them the best coverage that's the most affordable, and then service them through the life of the policy.
Got it. And then what was the origin story when in 2024? How did you come up with this idea and why did you start?
I had a company before this with my same co-founder, Tushar, and it imploded over time. We did it for about 3 years. It was like a wealth tech company. And when we decided to wind it down, we started to think to ourselves, well, what do we want to do next? And so as it was around the time that a lot of these kind of AI agents were in production around sales, like 11x and Artisan was sort of all the rage. And I also saw that in more regulated spaces, companies like Hippocratic AI were also working quite well. And especially in places where there were labor shortages, where there were kind of like a problem. So we sat back and we said to ourselves, okay, let's think about where we might do this. Now I have a family, like family members that are insurance brokers. So I grew up around the business. So it was one of the things I thought about, but we actually just went on Indeed, which is like a job platform here in the US, where we just looked and saw like, where are there sales jobs where people need someone? So we looked at SDR jobs. We looked at like wealth management jobs. We looked and saw lots of insurance jobs. So we said to ourselves, let's take our resumes, let's apply to these things, and we'll get a really good sense of where there's like a real labor problem or shortage. Started applying, and every single time we applied to an insurance company, we got an interview. I mean, I think in a day or two, we were getting like, I'm talking 90, 100 of these interviews, and everything else was a slow burn. But these people were like, can we talk today? So it seemed to us like there was like a little bit of a talent issue that was going on. So we'd go, and eventually what we realized is that, wow, there is this talent gap that exists here. And I knew from my childhood that the work that's being done is complicated because of judgment, but actually the process is not the most complicated thing in the world. So I saw, it's like, okay, well, AI can now make these judgments. Let me go see. So I said, hey, let's actually go like work with some insurance brokerages by like just going and doing the actual work. So one of us got a job at State Farm, like we did some State Farm work. I went and posted up at a bunch of these different brokers, like family, friends, and we would take out regular tools, things at the time like Claude, Clay, ChatGPT, and just try to get people to see, hey, you can respond to this email by doing this. It was so off-putting to folks. They were nervous about whether their jobs were going to be taken. It is a fundamentally different idea that like when I got a briefing for this interview, for example, one of the first things I thought to myself was, let me deconstruct this and like this kind of, it's a different way of doing work. Like the normal way somebody, they get a paper, they're going to be the judgment. So people like to think about themselves, especially in heavily relationship-driven businesses, as like the center focal point. They like that. It's their value. It's the only way they're valuable. So I started to get this sense that, hey, even if this gets really progressive, this workforce is not going to want to do this. So then I said, but let me like make sure I test this fully out. So we made a couple of quick tools and would go and try to shop it to folks. And it just seemed like these people didn't really want to pay that much for it. When they did want to do it, they were largely non-committal. And then I would run into the same workforce problem when maybe the CEO wanted to do it, but then other people didn't. So I said, okay, we're going to have to actually do this ourselves. So we basically got up and said, we're going to register as a brokerage. We only had like $50,000 or so at the time. So we could only do it in Georgia around my kitchen table. Yeah. And we said, hey, let's start Harper. And we made the mistake at our last company of like over productizing, like trying to build 50 million things and didn't really know that there was demand. That's what happened. And people fall into that trap. So this time we said, we're not building anything. We're going to literally call these people and do everything with my printer and my pencil and paper or pen and paper and make sure it's right. So we did that and we kind of looked up and lots of insights later, 3 months, by the end of the year, we had 100 customers and we applied to YC and started in January of 2025.
Wow. So I think now YC calls this category as, I think, AI native service category, right? That instead of providing agent to other firm, you become the actual agent. But that was not that popular when you started a few years ago. What was it like? What was your thought process? Was it that straightforward? Like, all right, we just got to do this? Or like, what were you thinking? And then?
Good question. I think at the time I was super nervous about becoming the service. I would sometimes go around and people like in tech circles, I do come from a tech investing background. So when I would talk to people about the idea, people were like, well, you know, maybe you should just do it. It was early days, but people like Sarah Tavel at the time was saying a lot like, get paid for the work. So the narrative was very like, you should be like a BPO almost. Like you should outsource the service and get paid for the work. So we did start to think about at one point us using a model where we used AI, but like sold the outcome to other people. It just became very clear to me, like thinking like an investor, that I'm only capturing a small portion of the value chain, and it would probably get difficult to do this at a lot of scale. And then when you look at insurance, they're making like a 10% commission oftentimes on a policy, and sometimes they're super tiny, like $1,000. It just seemed to me like I'm going to put a lot of effort, and model costs would go up and all kinds of things would happen, and I'd be left with very small value. And then the other part of my investor mind said, there's probably something to like data flywheel. Like usually really good businesses, like there was a lot of conversation also, will CRMs be dead? Like the conversation of, is the SaaS apocalypse happening was starting. It was very early, but starting. And again, I was an investor for a while, so I was like, this looks like something where maybe there's a problem here. So it just led me to say, hey, this is probably the way to do this.
Got it. Interesting. And was there any pushback or question from investors in the way that, oh, this is just AI native, service firms, so maybe not scalable compared to other B2B software type of?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Okay.
One thing you learn founding a company is like, you don't need to listen to investors in the world around you. You have to really like go feel the problem. At the end of the day, like you're sitting there on the edge of it all day. So there are certain things people can't tell you about your business when you live it. That's why I also chose not to make a bunch of things, but feel the pain of calling those. I cold called people. Hey, do you need insurance? I had to learn like who did need it? Why do some people need it? Why don't some people need it? I had to fill out the forms. I noticed every anomaly, and Tashar would sit next to me and like, we saw it. So it's just like one of those things, like I really encourage people to not think like in thousands or think too big or go to, just really fall in love with that early moment where you can be so close to every customer and so close to every problem that nobody can tell you anything about that industry and that business. Like you are actually the expert because you live and breathe it.
And looking at Harper today, like how much of the value chain is automated and how much of it is still sort of human in the loop?
Yeah. Every single part of what we do has at least 50 to 60% AI component. Whether it's like, we'll have a person have a first call with someone for 10 or 15 minutes, but all of these forms need to be filled out because we also operate in a more complex part of the insurance industry. So, if you're a regular coffee shop and you can click a button and get your coverage through a platform like Next, this is not our core customer. Our customers are like executive protection, marinas, like used car dealer, like just way more complexity. So it tends to have to go on the other side, not to an API, but like to a human broker at a carrier who's like actually underwriting everything. And so, every part of that chain, there's all a component. In some elements of the chain, it is more AI centered. Like for example, we don't have to do so much back and forth with customers when underwriters come back with questions. An AI agent largely goes over top of everything and has that conversation. The thing is, at the volume that we're operating today, AI, even if it's 80% accurate, 20% of the times where you're reaching an edge case or need human intervention, because we do also flag in our system when there needs to be a human intervention, the AI stops. I mean, we're talking to 300 new customers every single day. In a given day, we'll have 2,000 customer interactions across all of our existing customers and the new customers. So at that kind of scale, 20% of like thousands of things and then compounded over months and year gets kind of high. So there's still human intervention in the process. And one of the things I think that people who operate in this space start to understand, you really need a good quantum of humans before the system can do everything for sure. Because all of these edges have to be figured out, document it, put it into AI legible formats so that the system can continue to learn and improve. The self-learning organization is not fully here yet, right? So you're having to like do the reinforcement into the technology in some parts, and then also into like human operations yourself. It's like a new layer that kind of exists in an organization like this. But AI is at least 50% of every single workflow that we do.
That's interesting. So do you have someone or a specialized team that sort of audits everything and like tries to feed back into the AI?
We realized that we had to do that. So that's what we had to. It's funny because I kind of thought across the board, even with AI code, I mean, some of these PRs are so massive. Like, I mean, you have Greptile and you have these sort of tools, but AI slop can creep through when you're using all of this stuff. So across the board, I think a lot of times organizations have to get much further along in terms of their scale. People think a lot in terms of scale. We have 1,000 people. Now we need a QA team. Well, I think actually in these organizations, even with 40 people, there's so much volume of data and so many things happening. You actually have to pull that forward. But QA looks different. It's not a person sitting there listening to every single call. At the beginning, I encourage them to learn that, but it's things like building a platform that QAs calls automatically, using all of these edge cases that we find downstream, and then we feed those back to like do the auditing of the calls in a different way. Maybe we're using like skills in Claude as a way to remedy or to help do documentation or help to fix a system versus that a person is sitting there doing every piece of it. But we have had to make, like, I call it I use a lot of these fun terms, right? The enforcers, because it's a play on like reinforcing both systems and reinforcing people. So we have this like enforcer squad that goes around and helps to do some of that control.
And since you require some domain expertise, I'm guessing these enforcers are structured in a sort of very particular way for your industry, or?
So what ended up happening was that like we have good retention. It's an intense place to work, but people who work here and it works well, like they stay. So I have this earlier cohort of people who I call like a special projects team that really have just, as the organization kept growing, they kind of go with me and kind of charter in all these spaces. They have a lot of organizational context. This is domain expertise, but it's also organizational expertise about how Harper does things, how our systems work, because everything, we built our CRM ourselves. The ticketing system and service is not Asana. We built it ourselves. AI does everything there. The system for like coaching people through calls, both on sales and through intakes, is all something that we built. Any one of these things could be its own company. Like a lot of these tools that I see out there, they're point solutions for things that we've also built ourselves across the stack. And so you need domain expertise, but you also need Harper expertise. But what we've also done is we just recently started hiring for actual insurance, like underwriter experts that are from insurance companies to come here. And at Goldman, there was always this idea on the banking floor of a knowledge manager. Of course, I was dating myself, but pre-AI. So somebody would sit there and they were kind of the encyclopedia. They pull all these things together when you didn't know a domain. Basically, what we've done here is like embedded insurance experts, but instead of them doing the work, it's a lot similar to like a Legora or a Harvey will have like these legal engineers that come in. We essentially have made that same concept. And those folks help do a lot of things. They help teach context to engineers. They help us document things. They help us audit whether, the things that we have going out with AI systems, how do they register to underwriters and to carriers? And so there's the domain expert element of it. That is one part of quality control and organizational mapping. We call it like operational memory leads. That's what we call these underwriter folks. But it's also in the enforcers part of it. It's like people who understand how Harper operates and the systems operate that are able to go to like this particular engineer who owns this particular part of the system and like do that reinforcement.
It's amazing. It sounds like you apply AI to almost every part of internal process operational.
It is.
Do you have any numbers or stats that you can show that how efficient your team has become? I don't know how much AI can carry the quota versus a traditional place, or anything that you can share that how efficient you guys are?
One I like to go to a lot is that like a typical broker, our understanding is like, we'll make like 200,000 or so of new, do 200,000 or so of new revenue a year. For the average salesperson here at Harper, it's like on the floor, it's 1.2 million, and some as high as 2 million of new revenue per year.
Each salesperson is bringing 1.2 to 2 million on an annual basis.
So it's funny because a lot of times people think in like software terms are like, oh, an AI company is like a rep can make $1 million of ARR. Well, in Harper, that's also what's happening in a service business. That's what also keeps me honest, because at Coach, another big thing I learned was like, if this is really this thing, it should hit a benchmark, even if it's new. It's like there's nothing new under the sun. So in my view, if services are really creating software-like outcomes, I should be able to comp myself to a SaaS company. And so that's what I'm proud of, and that's one of the core North Stars that we look to.
For the salesperson, can you give us a few examples, like how you're making that efficient so that those kind of reps can bring that much of revenue?
For sure. Well, part of it is that we have this whole assembly line system that gets the quote to them. So, I mean, like because we have this going in intakes, for example, we have like a 10-person intake team, but they're doing 300 new calls with customers every single day. Because we have an ability for the AI because we've documented all of this knowledge around edge cases, like this underwriter likes the submission in this way. This underwriter will accept a bar, but they won't accept the bar where there are not quarterly trainings for the bartenders. There are all these little nuances, but because we built systems that document all of this stuff more programmatically and have dedicated knowledge elements of our business, the systems understand this, so the routing is more efficient. So we're also not getting as much back and forth. In the early days, we were only able to do like 5 or so of these a day, and it would take us maybe an hour or 2 to even put together a submission packet. Today these things are happening like we'll do all 300 submissions in an hour or 2 because the system is largely understanding what to do. And so what that means for a salesperson is like a never-ending pipeline. Like they're just overloaded with constant pipeline of things to sell. And then that leads to a question of like, how do we prioritize? In a typical sales organization, you make the sales playbook, you hand it off to the sales team. The sales team has to ingest it, and you're kind of have a manager that's sitting there always trying, the sales enablement, constantly trying to reinforce. Well, at Harper, we built our own CRM, so the system is the sales enablement. Like it's telling them what to do. It's giving them digest. It's telling them how to prioritize their day. When they get off a call with somebody and the person says, hey, call me back tomorrow at 2 p.m., they're not making a meeting to call the person back at 2 p.m. It's just made for them. Like, oh, there's a calendar, So because AI is taking on a lot of just not like intelligence, but like doing actions and doing things that otherwise took context from the rep to be able to discern, we're able to also put a new person in a seat and quickly ramp them to that same kind of minimum floor of ARR, like in a month max, because of that dynamic.
Interesting. So all the prepping and I guess all the decision making has been done and handed off to the AE. So I'm guessing the AE just has to spend time on just building relationships or talking to the clients.
Exactly.
Okay. Interesting.
Exactly.
And I'm curious, the build versus buy sort of conversation. Like, why did you decide to build the CRM yourself instead of buying it? And I'm sure there's other tools around it that you've decided to build. Are there anything, like, how did you make the decision? And is there anything you're buying, actually?
Yeah. We used to use HubSpot. So when we were kind of like, at some point, we started getting to too much scale. And then when we were in YC, we got HubSpot because we were like, we need to track all of this stuff. Like, we need to get the data together. And as we tried to build AI tools, point tools at the time around it, they could not integrate. So it just was always this never-ending loop of like, we want to get to a point where we can do all these things, but the systems can't speak, to use layman's terms, to speak to each other. And so we realized there was no other way for us to be able to do what we wanted to do at the scale we were aiming for. We also had just the core belief that we're going to be big. Like, I think when we started to see, it was like demand was not a core problem in this industry. There could be 5 versions of Harper that all get huge, and there'll still be more businesses that we have not covered, right? So it's just such a large pool of demand. So we believed in ourselves and our go-to-market strategy that we can find all these people. So when we started to, if we made sure we confirmed that, but once we had conviction that scale was there, we had to think about building scalable systems. And so it just became clear to us that we could not do, 50,000 customers a month or something like that if we were going to have systems that were so constrained by this inability to work with each other. And so that's what led us to do it. But we always, every turn, considered, should we buy Zendesk? Should we buy Asana? And at points we used Asana, for example, for customer service early on, but there were limitations because we wanted to integrate into our broader universe of things or to like sit on top of a memory layer and actually update automatically. It couldn't do it, right? We couldn't connect it to everything. And so we just realized that that's what we were going to have to do if we were really going to build the system that could scale out.
Like, do you have a specific engineers who's focused on building internal tools versus the product?
Yeah. Internal tools are all of our product. If you think about us as like, we are the customer. So when we talk about user interviews at Harper, that's like an engineer who builds the CRM talking to a salesperson. But the feedback loop in a regular enterprise sales cycle is this slow, like you have to beg them and through Slack, can you give us feedback? What do you think about this? Then it's always just like when something's breaking. And so you have to be so careful about what you even push out to this customer, because while they say they'll do pilots with you, you're nervous they're not going to activate the ARR. For us, I mean, we've had crappy versions of the stuff. I mean, we've had the CRM working 10% of the time, right? But like part of our whole thesis and everybody's alignment, even on the sales team, is like, hey, for us, we want to become a huge company. So we have to eat the glass, as Elon might say, of like this product while it's still in development, because how else are we going to get to the bigger picture? Our incentives are aligned. When you're not the full service provider, the incentive alignment is not there in the same way. Slower feedback cycles, slower product builds. And then also people hide information or don't always tell you what they feel. Here, we sit down every day, multiple times a day. It's not let me call this meeting about feedback. It's the engineer who's responsible for sales sitting next to and watching people do things in the CRM right now and fixing things with this computer in their lap right now. Like, it's that kind of dynamic, right? So, it's like, I think about the early story of like ZocDoc, where they kind of went and implemented ZocDoc at all of these different doctors' offices, and they watched them do the scheduling, and when there was a problem, they would fix it. But it's that story repeated every day, and every day we never want to lose that. And I think that's a really big competitive advantage of like the business model that we have.
Amazing.
What are you buying? Like something that you're not building yourself?
The models.
The models.
Which ones?
all of them. Sorry, we're doing it with all of the models. Sometimes things around voice, we've tried different harnesses around voice that we haven't had a ton of. I think that's something we're going to have to build more and more of ourselves versus it's been hard to get other people to do. But yeah, that's that in telephony systems. So we do build around like OpenPhone, Genesis. These kinds of systems have been a part of that stack. So we do the telephony systems and we do the models. But every piece of software we have built ourselves.
Slack?
We do also use Slack, but we actually we use Slack. I also am like a big proponent of like very quick, rapid feedback loops. So I actually like get everybody these Harper phones, and we use a lot of iMessage because I want like very fast cycles, and I'm trying to run so many things. So we're moving fast at all times. So we want people to have like instant kind of communication. And so we do use Slack, but funny enough, like not even that much. It's more like when there's something that we need to make sure has long-term preservation, and our models, of course, go into Slack, pull out of channels. So everything from Slack is showing up in our systems. It's just like another data point in our memory systems in our CRM. So it's just a place where we do some preservation of certain types of conversations, but largely for like the moving around and doing things. Hey, come over here. We're doing this on like our company iPhone accounts.
What is the hardest thing that you guys built? Like the hardest technical breakthrough that you're either trying to go through or you have accomplished?
Yeah. The hardest one, I think, is like the underlying memory systems and making sure they're super accurate. People are sending us pictures, videos. We're getting text messages because we have like, OpenPhone or Genesis. So there's that. And we have emails and from underwriters, from the customer, making sure all of that stuff like matches appropriately in the system so that when an agent actually makes the action on top of it, has complete information. Imagine if the agent doesn't have like one piece of information with the person saying, oh, I also need XYZ coverage. Or even worse, like I had XYZ claim. And so now you're not giving that back to the carrier. You have to have extremely good reliability at the memory layer. So I think one of the best like breakthroughs that we've had is like a lot of the core technical infrastructure that allows us to build anything on top. That's the one thing I think people kind of get wrong. Like at more scale, what I always tell people, like our organization of engineers should look more like a cursor or look a little bit closer to like what an infrastructure-ish type company looks like, because we're having to build a lot of underlying infrastructure pieces in order to put all these applications on top.
Are you ever concerned, or do you ever think about like gross margins or those kind of things? So there is, the anecdote that the more AI reliable we are as a product or as a service, the lower the gross margins may be, right?
Yeah.
Is that a concern or something that you're tracking, or?
It is something that we track. Because also like I was an investor.
Yeah.
So even now, I think, I can kind of already foresee conversations with not our investors today are more focused on us being getting the thing out.
Yeah.
But I do know that the conversation around optimization, when you see things like Microsoft might drop cloud code, because it's costing so much, I know eventually that kind of conversation will come to light. And so I also make us choose and justify the AI spend every month. So I'll sit down with the Shar and I'll ask, well, why aren't we using Sonnet here? Why are you using 4.8 Opus? Is there a real reason why we want to do that? And I know that people, again, I think in like more hype cycles, people allow a lot of things to go through, but I do also understand that ultimately I'm like building a public company. I used to be a hedge fund investor. Like I know how people analyze public companies. And so I do make sure that those technical decisionings work. That said, I'm very optimistic about the future of model costs. Like when you look at stuff like what's happening with DeepSeek, now the geopolitical conversations about whether, that should be used, and so that's one piece. But if that lab is able to do things at such a fraction of the cost of some of the bigger labs here, at some point, my view is like the government will also want to see that happen in America. And so I just think that like more of the training cost reduction that come from some of these new mechanisms that are developed will continue to drive model costs down. That's why we don't build with just one model in mind. Our infrastructure is interoperable, and we try these different loops with different models all the time as we release them, so that we're always ready for a day when the model has to change. But I think that ultimately all of these costs will compress because innovation will require that it happens. And so I build today with a future state in mind that I think these model costs will ultimately compress. I think you should also just be very aware of your particular businesses, because of course a margin is a percentage of a revenue, and you have to think about the LTV of the customer and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I also have a business where it's like very sticky, 90+% retention because it's your insurance. We believe over time we can move from doing just commercial insurance to other type of insurance for these folks, and then payroll services, compliance. In a lot of ways, I think we can be rippling, but for middle America is a lot of how I think about our company with insurance is the first wedge. So when you start to think about a future of multi-product, I have a core belief in that. I believe in the LTV of our business. I see the retention. So when I think about margin, I also think about margin over many years and decades. And so I think that if we can provide this amazing service to folks, firstly layered on AI, but it's just helping us do that better, we'll retain customers, be able to do more things for our customers, and we'll have good bottom line as a public company.
Interesting. Makes total sense. So not everything needs to have the most frontier, most advanced model.
Yes,
and
sure.
If you break down the value chain, there are areas where you can have a haiku or a sonnet or
because what used to happen before, people were trying to think like, how do I get AI to solve every problem at once?
Yeah.
Well, you tell the AI system, hey, go do 50 things.
Yeah.
I mean, good luck. That's why you have stuff like Cowork, where it splits into multiple, steps. So we do the same thing with our workflows. It's not like one thing is orchestrating. At that point, you do need a 4.8 opus to orchestrate complex workflows. They even say that for complex tasks is where you use 4.8. But for when you start to break it down into simpler tasks, other models work just fine for simpler tasks.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you're probably tired of answering this question, but I have to ask, what is the moat that you're trying to build like around your business?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
My hot take is that the only enduring moat businesses have is like their brand. At some point, everybody will be able to build software really easily because the models will get better and better. At some point, everybody will have models that can do all kinds of units of work.
Yeah.
The models are actually getting smarter. They're hiring people, insurance, wealth management inside of the model companies and training more on those data sets. So I'm less focused on that, though that's important too, and it's like a core thing that we do. I'm super focused on brand. What does that mean? For insurance carriers, are we showing up and getting them like a clean submission? Are we getting them risk that makes sense that don't have high loss ratios? Are we helping to do some of the pre-vetting and compliance that show up as like Harper is somebody that we can trust as a partner that's reliable, that's there, that's high quality? That's our brand on that side of the marketplace. For our customers, are we showing up and making sure that we do what we say we're going to do? Are we getting them quotes in the times that we say we're going to get them quotes? When we tell them we're going to deliver a COI to them, is it on time? When they come to us in these desperate moments where they have claims, are we helping them through the process? Our brand is predicated on us showing up. AI is helping us do all of that better. The tech is helping us do all of that better. But ultimately, that brand is what matters. I think there are other things that start to compound over top of that brand. Of course, because you show up and do what you say you're going to do, you can do fast, you get a data moat. And the data is not just like, oh, we have all this data on claims with our customers. That's cool. But it's more about our workflow and the documentation. Our internal enforcers team is a moat. We know every single process that we do here at Harper. Everything is recorded. It's kind of inspired by Bridgewater in a way. We record everything. Every meeting is recorded and then digested and put into this taxonomy that AI can read. It's AI legible. So that as models do get better and eventually reinforcement is something that you don't have to engineer, but the model can do it itself. Well, when it's in that world, Harper's super primed because everything is documented, right? So we are building data about our operational workflows as much as the risk profiles of all these things. And then also, again, I come from a finance background, like relationships just matter. That's one of the biggest principles at Goldman that I think is one of the most enduring real things of all time. I show up on a plane and I meet these underwriters in person. They come to our office. They show us what they're doing. I show up and we know each other. I know the presidents of some of these wholesale brokers and carriers, and I go to their conferences. So another part of it is like if somebody shows up and says, I want to be Harper, they won't just think, oh, Harper is this insurtech. They'll think of Harper as Dakotah. Harper as that guy I went to his office and we had a drink. So I don't want to lose humanity in the midst of building AI. It actually is the biggest moat. So in my view, like that touch with the customer, that touch with the supply side, that enduring piece that just outlasts technology advances, that's what our moat really is.
Interesting. It sounds like so capturing everything and using that context to, I guess, create better outcomes, better quality for our customers, and ensuring trust is the way to go, I guess.
Absolutely.
Interesting. And right now everything's so competitive, right? And it feels like there's a new startup every day. Everyone's after you. How do you ensure that you guys are winning? Like, what do you track, or what do you look at? What do you care about most to make sure that you guys are winning?
I forget which one of these people. It's a common adage of all of these super successful, way beyond us founders, that like, I think it was Bill Gates. I'm only focused on Microsoft. Like, it's like I'm only focused on Harper. I will post things on LinkedIn, but like it's largely like I make my thoughts and then I get them posted. I don't listen to noise. I focus on Harper. So what do I look at? I don't think about I don't look beside or behind me at people. And when people try to bring that to my space, I am pretty clear about not polluting my space with that, because it doesn't allow me to obsess about the problems I have at Harper if I'm obsessing about XYZ person. So the things that I look at, is Harper growing as healthily as it was before or better? do I see a path to further exponential growth in front of me? Am I seeing more customers every day in my pipelines than I could satiate? And am I figuring out a real plan to make sure that I could satiate those things? When those customers come in, am I providing them that top quality experience even as I scale out? If I'm doing all of these things, like I have no doubt in my mind that, you know, if I can just go make sure I have a company that's making $1 billion of revenue and customers are happy, I'll have a valuable company for everybody. The customer will see value, the carriers will see value, our investors will see value, our employees will see value, everybody will see upside from it. So I just keep my eye squarely on the prize in front of me. I make sure I'm abreast of technological advances. I make sure that I'm understanding the latest advances in models. I make sure that I never get sleepy or complacent. It's so weird to imagine any Series A founder getting sleepy and complacent. Like in general, it's like a funny concept, but like, of course I'm not. But anyway, I'm always. I do have this kind of like constant. One of the things I learned in some of these places I work, you have this constant paranoia in the back of your mind. It's like it eats at you a little bit. Not because XYZ person raised whatever or did. It's just that in your mind, you're like, am I really on top of everything? You know, I just obsess about being on top of everything. So it's like, but I know if I'm staying up all night obsessing about Harper's problems like I am every single day of my life, there's no way that value won't be created for our customers, for our carriers, for the employees, for our shareholders. And that's what my driving factor is.
Is that why you guys work from like 5 a.m. every morning? Is that
Well, we
true?
started at 5 a.m. because of the fact that I don't want cultural erosion by having a New York office yet. Like I think that like until I can really, culture is so important. The way we work. There's something about Harper that like when I think about our Moat 2, for me, it sounds foo-foo when I say it, so I don't usually say on camera or something, but like, you know, for me, a large part of it is like who we are, like how we show up, how we work, the pace we work at, what we do, right? I can never lose that. The moment I lose that, I lose everything. Most of these companies that start off, the founder, oh, this is great, it's going, and the founder's just in the midst of the scale happening, it gets lost. And I can't lose it. So I'm obsessed about not losing it. So we come at 5 because we have customers that start their business at 9 and don't care about their insurance after 9. They care about their insurance at 8 o'clock. So that's why we're starting at 5. We started in Georgia. So at Georgia, we'd be up at 7 and start talking to customers. So here, but you know, the 5 is largely a result of that and a lack of this and a paranoia about cultural erosion. So until I have enough of a base that I feel like it's solid of everything I need here in San Francisco, it weeds some people out. Unfortunately, you know, I mean, I think there's some great people that ultimately like the hours or something did not work for them, and that's okay. But it's critical for me because I know that the moment I let that slip, the moment I have a New York office and it doesn't feel like this place, I have a problem.
What time do you leave office?
I leave the office usually about 9:30.
It's 5 a.m. to 9:30.
Yeah, that's when I leave the office. Other people here leave the office at like 6:30. We have like a wrap meeting at 6, so some people leave at 6:30. But largely people are, you know, the group of people leading the charge of the company are largely from 5 to about 9.
So 996 is too old.
No. So that's the one thing I will say. 996, I am a big proponent of you have to have some decompression time because that's my thinking time.
Yeah.
So for me, it's also like a couple of things. One, I don't have people coming here on Saturday and we'll talk on Sunday, but we're usually remote on Sunday in the evening time. But I want people to like have their family. I want to have a family. I want to that kind of thing too. The other thing is like sometimes when you have to have just slow thinking time. So if people say like, hey, in certain functions, of course, in sales or something where the customers are calling in at 5 is different. But if you're saying, hey, I actually need to develop this marketing strategy and being at the office at 5 might hinder that. I need to come in today at like 8 or 9 so that I can really think and I'll just be available on Zoom or something for meetings, but I need to stay at home to, people do that too. So we start at 5 as in our business starts to hum at 5. So anybody who I always make sure I keep the phone lines on so I hear it. I have to feel it. I keep like, I have these emails that like have all the emails together. I look at it every couple hours. I need to feel this company at all times, but you could also feel the company at 5 a.m. from your desk at home if that's the best way for you to work.
Awesome.
What on your hiring criteria is becoming more and more important, especially as an AI native company?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
That across all the roles, you're really keeping up with like the new tech stack around AI, because like you do the role, but like we also have to make sure everything's being documented, that you understand things like taxonomy, you understand AI legibility. You know, increasingly these days, you can, especially in kind of biz opsy roles and also engineering roles, sometimes the super subject matter experts, it can kind of be a little bit more difficult, but you should be abreast of like, how does one build a self-reinforcing company? Like, you should probably be in that discourse. You might not have every answer, but you should be in that discourse. I make cloud skills. You should make cloud skills. I know how to go use, I know my best sequence I ask people sometimes, like, what's the sequence that you use to build a memo, for example? For me, it's like, I'll start it in GPT Pro and I'll get like some base data and then I'll start querying that. And then when it gets to a point where I want it to be like more refined language, I'll put it into 4.8 and then I'll take it. You have these kind of sequences. You can still, when you talk to somebody, you can tell if they use AI. You can tell they really use it.
And that's what you're looking for when you interview someone.
It's important.
Okay.
Yeah, we look at a number of things. The most important thing is pace. I love the Sarah Guo article. It's like, I literally like the biggest fanboy of the Sarah Guo articles. I like the taste article and the pace article. Anybody here, I constantly, I hope Sarah Guo hears that. I love her pace article. It is a guiding factor here, which is just this idea of like, slow people make fast people frustrated. You have to move and hire for, it's so true, right? When really smart people who move fast get together, magic happens, right? So I also really, the strongest thing I'm looking for is cultural alignment. And one of the core tenets of our culture, intellectual curiosity, great, but pace, critical. So that's really what I'm hiring for. These other things help you keep pace. Because I can have like, if you're smart, you'll like run like 10 different instances of GPT with like micro workflows because you just know what you're doing. So I can be Superman. I can do all these things at once. So it helps you increase your pace by using these tools. So it's less that you're just using them. It's more like understanding the underlying why around why you would want to build a good taxonomy for your organization and make it AI legible and what that will mean for you to keep up pace.
It feels like pace, the definition of the right pace is changing every day, right? And how do you sort of gauge on like what's the right pace? And do you ever sort of recalibrate on like the right pace for your business from time to time?
I think it depends on the role. The thing that I've like started to develop is like for some roles, especially these ones that are like, let me analyze what happened end to end for this edge case and then root cause analyze and then do reinforcement. That should be a slower thinking. Though your pace, in my opinion, is more about the urgency with which you move. You can do slow thinking with urgency, right? So I think someone could do that and maybe it takes an hour, but that's not that the pace is slow. That just means that the task requires a slowness or methodical thought. I don't think that pace and thinking methodically are at odds with one another. For me, pace is a lot more about like your intrinsic desire to win and paranoia around losing and how that like inspires you to operate with urgency. Though your operation could be methodical or could be, at this moment, I have to just go make a snap decision. I'm going to go and be driven by instinct. That part changes, but the urgency should never change.
Interesting.
That's my view.
Interesting. And, you've raised over $40 million in your Series A from very reputable VC, Emergence and others. Just for my educational purposes, what's the criteria now to raise a strong Series A? Like, is there like a growth, like you have to be 5x or 10x, or your NRR has to be 100% or 200%? Like, what's the thing that's most important, or what are a few things that you should be looking at?
I think it's like the slope of the growth.
Okay.
And people's belief that slope can be enduring into a large TAM. That's how I would describe it. Because sometimes I hear numbers that people raise that are less than what we raised at. I think I think we publicly talked about this. We raised at like $5 million of ARR. Some people are raising a Series A at $1 million ARR. But like maybe in a couple months, they were able to show this crazy, $1 million is probably becoming more the de facto standard, but maybe let's call it 2. So they were able to grow to $2 million in 3 months. But I think people are also more weary of that being a blip in time. And so there has to be this idea that like what you're doing is replicable and has like this enduring potential. And I think that that's still a question mark for up in my investor hat. And I would still be skeptical about that for a lot of things. But if it's a large enough TAM and the right team and they're showing the steepness of their learning curve as well, then I think that's what should make you compelled to be able to go do the investment. A lot of times, and what Emergence did, and I think people should do to validate this in my investor mind, you got to go talk to customers. I mean, they talk to carriers that we work with. They talk to wholesale brokers that we've worked with. They talk to our customers. Like at the end of the day, you can tell if something's really adding value because of what people say about it. So I think if you combine the steepness of the learning curve of the management team, and a lot of time I think like founder market fit also matters a lot. Shar and I both built in regulated space before. We failed a company before. We learned a lot. And they ask you, and you should ask people, when you failed, what did you learn? That's so critical because all these learnings just made me better for where I am today. So you have to ask those questions. But I think if people feel confident about the management team, the steepness of the learning curve, the steepness of the growth curve of the business, and feel like it's a large addressable opportunity, and there's some endurance you can tell from talking to the customers, and I think that's the formula.
Interesting. You mentioned earlier that you're looking for the exponential growth, right? What are some of the focus areas to ensure that you have that exponential growth happening in the future?
Continuing to build out more depth with our AI legibility as an organization, continuing to build out the underlying infrastructural pieces of the business on which all the AI agents are really running on top of. Great hiring of people who understand this compounding dynamic and why it's so important and think about their job even in sales as really a product. Everybody needs to think with a very strong product mindset. That's all really important. And then I think, of course, another part of it is like you want to get your system really primed, but at some point you have to start really thinking a lot more about building brand. So another really important focus for us is like marketing, brand building, being more present around our customers and thinking about what that looks like. Those are the ways that I think that the compounding happens, but I really do think a lot of it comes down to building an organization that has this reinforcement loop into the technology and into people through learning and development.
Awesome.
If you're an investor, any other category you think this AI native service firm approach would work, outside of insurance brokerage area in your view?
I think there are a lot of them. I think anywhere, this would be my guiding principle, anywhere where incumbents seem like there's fragmentation among incumbents and it seems like there's no imperative for them to adopt AI in a serious way that could be transformational for their own outcome. I think in insurance brokerages, like there's 400,000 insurance brokerages out there. Like it's so fragmented. They also make such low amounts of money, though the margins can be really great on the business. They just are fine as a lifestyle business. So there's not really that's why there have not been a lot of unicorn this is another thing I would look for. Have there been a lot of unicorn outcomes in software selling into this type of buyer archetype? In insurance broker, there's not a lot of people. There's I can't really think of any other than like Vertafore or like there's like one or two that have been like really big outcomes. But largely speaking, there have not been a huge outcome selling software to brokers. That says something sleepy about that market. In markets where you have that sleepiness and there is like something that's more than just the software, I would probably sit back and think to myself, let's say that GPT could do everything their engineering team could do. Let's say that self-reinforcing could happen. If all these things happen, what would make this company still special? Would it still be special? If somebody else could go buy off the shelf from Anthropic this exact underlying tech stack, what would be special about this team and what's happening? I think that is a core thing. At some point, I think it ultimately comes down to also you have to be a first mover. That's why I think the people who want to start these companies, I would go do it right now. Because a lot of what we're doing, again, it's data around how we operate, not just that we have all this data about the customers. I think, a lot of people will critique like an Acrisure or a Marsh or State Farm or something. They keep calling it old and legacy, sure, but they built really great moats around their operations. You can use AI everywhere and still the operation itself, what the AI is trained on is the operation. Building strong operational foundations in business that require multi-turn kind of sequencing, top tier. So just get out there and start building this stuff now so you have all of that in a place that we can benefit from all of this technological change. Because that's, at some point I wonder whether that will start being diminishing if you have not started it already.
Do you have any plan to go to Japanese market?
I think there's a future where I don't think in the US we will put Harper software into production for other folks, but I do think internationally the problems are the same and the process is the same. And we actually work with some carriers like Tokyo Marine that are in Japan today. So in my view, I think that we could license Harper systems to people in other countries that are building insurance brokers. Again, I don't think I would do it here in the US, but I think that there is a really great opportunity to do that across really in a lot of parts of Asia, including Japan.
It's awesome.
Yeah. So the closing question that we have is, for founders, who are watching this, especially these are Japanese founders looking to run or scale their AI startup, what is a topic that you think that they should be thinking about right now, especially in the context that it's something that you sort of regret not thinking about it earlier in your career?
I would think about how at the end of the day, humans and the way you run your operation, especially in AI native services, is still very integral to how the AI is going to have impact. It's only as good as what it's built on top of. So I think early on, I would go out and I talked about the idea of the synthetic brokerage, which I still think is something we can ultimately achieve. But I think in the early days of Harper, while I was doing the phone thing and I was learning the flows, I think I was over-indexing way too quickly on deleting every human out of the process. I think the work modality that humans are using is different. For example, this enforcer concept or, AI legibility as a concept, and new jobs are forming around what's happening in the operation. But I would not be too quick to get so indexed on automating everything that you miss the signal.
Great advice. I think that's a lot to contemplate on. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you all. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.